Hey guys, I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
Hey, today we're going to talk about something we've talked about before a little bit, but I want to talk about more of the benefits and maybe some of the consequences if you don't use this. But I want to talk about vitamin D, vitamin D3 in particular, and vitamin K2. And the reason being is most everyone, I'm going to say probably everyone that's watching this video right now has an inadequate amount of vitamin D3 in their system. And I say D3 for a reason. Vitamin D3 is what our body makes out of cholesterol and UVB light. And then our body can convert it to other things it uses, different forms of vitamin D. The liver's involved, the kidneys are involved in these processes. And if those two things aren't working well, you're going to have a problem. But vitamin D3 is so important. Think about this for a minute. Vitamin D3 is so important. It is the only vitamin as human beings we can make. There is some evidence that at one point we could make some of the vitamin B vitamins with a very, very healthy gut. But nowadays, nobody's gut is healthy enough for that as far as friendly bacteria go. Generally, B vitamins, specifically B12, are made in the gut of cattle. Cattle are a very good source, so beef is an outstanding source, natural source of vitamin B, vitamin B12 specifically, because their guts can make it, ours cannot. I believe chickens, some kinds of poultry, birds, they can make some vitamin C themselves. That's the funny thing about that is that's the only vitamin not in an egg. Vitamin C, well, these chickens can make it themselves. That's kind of neat. Anyways, back to vitamin D and K2. So vitamin D is required for the intestines to be able to pull calcium from our food and bring it to our blood. Okay, now having high blood calcium, that can be a problem too. That's where vitamin K2 comes in. Vitamin K2 is another one of those things that if your gut was healthy enough, you could convert vitamin K, like from greens. Greens are a great source of vitamin K, into K2. Problem is, almost everyone watching this video right now cannot do that, and if they can, it's not very well. So you have to supplement with vitamin K2 also. Those of you that are concerned with blood clotting, things like that, guys, don't confuse this with vitamin K. K2 is a different form of vitamin K, and vitamin K is required for the body to pull the calcium out of the blood that the vitamin D3 has enabled you to get in the blood in order to put it in the bones.
Yeah, that's K2.
Where it belongs, vitamin K2, correct. Vitamin K, it has some different functions that generally deal with blood clotting. Not talking about that today. Vitamin K2 and D3 are quite often nowadays found combined in the same pill, if you will, the same supplement, because it's so important for them to be taken at the same time. Taking one or the other by themselves, I'm sure they have benefits. I mean, they got to, because we're inadequate in all of them. Taking calcium by itself, there were some things we have done before. Dr. Bill in the past had talked about how taking a calcium supplement cannot necessarily not be that good for you, especially when you have calcium and you don't have vitamin D3 and K2 present at the same time. So keep that in mind as you move forward. Now I want to talk a little bit, I'm going to let Dr. Hall talk here in a second and fill in what I've left out, but D3 is so important we can make it. I've said that already. We can make it with sunlight and cholesterol. So to me, it sounds like cholesterol is pretty important.
Oh yeah.
And so is sunlight. And there are lots of studies that show the farther up in the northern hemisphere that you live, the more you have to supplement with D3. Also, the more melanin you are blessed with. you have to supplement with more D3. In other words, the darker your skin, the slower the process that you actually make D3. Now, you do have a benefit. Don't get me wrong. You don't get sunburned as bad. Or sometimes not at all. I have a friend who never gets sunburned. He doesn't even know what it's like. But he always takes D3 because he has an inadequate amount of it. Very, very important. K2 is very important. Not having enough, we already talked about one. I mean, look at your bones. I mean, that's where rickets comes in. Mm-hmm. I mean, and rickets is something, at one point in time, I believe vitamin D3 was the number 65 out of all medicines, just recently, that were prescribed by doctors, which now it's over the counter, it's a supplement that you can buy. But they were prescribing it for people having an inadequacy causing other health problems. Guys, it's a very, very important thing. I read some studies that show your testosterone will be low. It can damage your mood. I was just talking to a friend this morning, a study I ran across, where it showed that an inadequate amount of vitamin D3 actually would cause you not to be able to build muscle as well when you work out. And we can go a little deeper than that. It affects your myostatin, which myostatin is what says, hey buddy, all right, we can't stop producing muscle. You're gonna it keeps us from producing too much where we don't just continually grow, if you will. But what happens is when you don't, it makes that myostatin so powerful you can't produce any muscle. So it's important. It's very, very important. And I think we should all make sure that we get that. I think you'll feel better. Your mood will be better. I mean, think about how good you feel when you go outside in the sun and enjoy the sun, or you go to the beach vacation. How good that week made you feel and how good you feel after that. Guys, a lot of that has to do with our ability to make that vitamin. Dr. Hall, what would you like to add to this?
Well, that was really good, Sean.
Thank you, Dr.
I don't know that I need to add a lot. We talked about, or I did, especially in another video about vitamin D3 and how much and what the recommended amount is and what it probably should be, or somewhere along there. We don't really know. Remember that the RDAs, the RDIs, all that, they're estimates, and they're not really based on science, on where they've actually done studies. This is what you need. They're based on what they've kind of assayed, and this is what they're finding in people's blood. Now they're understanding, like you said, they're understanding that, man, over 95% of Americans, adults, are low on vitamin D. Vitamin D3. And one guy I read said anywhere north of the Mason-Dixon line, it's pretty much 100%. Below that, it might be a little bit better, but just not getting enough sun. And I mentioned this before, I'll say it again this time, but the recommended amount for vitamin D, vitamin D3, 200 to 600 or 800, depending on who you look at. No more than 800 international units per day. And yet, they have learned that in 15 to 20 minutes of whole body sunlight, we can produce up to 20,000, 25,000 international units, and it gets into the bloodstream. Now, what does that tell you? Number one, that tells me that we were designed to have somewhere, and the range has been 10. The lowest I've seen is 10,000 international units per day from the skin. Is what we're designed, up to 25,000. And then I saw somewhere they tested 15 minutes. 15 minutes gets you right at 20,000 IU, and it goes into the bloodstream. So that tells me that we were designed for that much.
Right.
That also tells me that 200 IUs, 600 IUs a day is a joke.
Yeah.
And then when you look and say, well, we're all low, we're way low at that. So, and then I mentioned this before, but there were studies that go and people say, well, that was a long time ago. They didn't know what they're doing. People knew what they were doing. I mean, it's not like civilization arose with the advent of the pharmaceutical industry. I guarantee you, there were people that were living and surviving a long time before that ever happened. happened, before modern medicine ever happened, and they were figuring things out. 100 years ago, and even in the 1930s, they were treating and curing long-standing tuberculosis by treating them up to like 60,000, 150,000 IUs a day for months or more.
And I mean, compare that to the, how would you say, 400 was recommended?
Well, 200 to 800 or 200 to 600. So the young people, 200 up to my age, they're saying maybe 800 per day.
Okay, and then your size and whatnot. And they were treating it with how many a day?
Well, just 150,000, 300,000. There's all kinds of studies they found in the 30s, not 30s and 40s. Here's a quote. And see, I read that and I thought, well, I'm not real smart, but I try to be not real stupid either. And if we were designed to produce 25,000 international units a day in our skin, then probably that's about right. Probably.
That's about how much we need.
Because God's pretty smart. He has a pretty good idea what's going on and what He's doing. And then I found this quote. And this is a quote. The current adult recommendation, and I was saying, that sounded like to me the current recommendation is almost criminal, let alone way out of line. But anyway, the current adult recommendations for vitamin D, 200 to 600 IUs per day, are very inadequate. I think that's pretty mild. When one considers that a 10 to 15 minute whole body exposure to peak summer sun will generate and release up to 20,000 IUs of vitamin D3 into the circulation. So it's not just that it's being produced and it's sitting around, it's being poured into the circulation.
So
and that's 20,000 IUs in 10 to 15 minutes.
And think about this for a minute. Just think about this. Tell me if this makes sense to you. And you know what? Put in the comments. Start a conversation about this when you're watching this. But think about this for a minute. I have a car, and I put gas in it, and I don't drive it. And then the next day I put gas in it. I can't put any more gas in it because it's full. The next day I try and put gas in it again. Let's pretend that gas is the cholesterol that we make our vitamin D3 out of in our body. So now we hear people being concerned about having high cholesterol. Okay? Now, we can go into another video on that. I don't quite buy into all that either, because a lot of research shows that that's not what they make it out to be. But anyway, we'll go into that on another video. But if our body uses cholesterol to make vitamin D3 with the sun, then would it not use up some of that cholesterol every time we did that? And maybe, quite possibly, bring our cholesterol level down? So if we never go in the sun, we have an inadequacy of vitamin D3. And we can get into some more things about what cholesterol is used to make. What? Every hormone you can think of, probably. I think vitamin D3 is actually, its total name is something, it's a steroid of some kind, basically. And so vitamin D3 is one thing, testosterone's another thing, estrogen's another thing that we use cholesterol to make in our bodies. So that's another thing to consider, when we're talking about this vitamin D3 and all of the benefits of vitamin D3.
Well, and the thing is people don't understand this, but there is a lot of dogma out there in everything, but there certainly is in medicine. That shouldn't be there. People observe something there. You can just list things, but one of them is this. They were talking about the dogma of why we think that we should have such a small amount of vitamin D3. Sometimes a physician will observe one patient that something happened to that patient, and they tie it. And maybe in this case, that patient took quite a bit of vitamin D3. Oh my gosh, that was toxic. Don't take any more vitamin D. And in one case, that can become dogma. It's reported, then it gets in the literature, then every student reads that, and it becomes dogma. And it's not based on science. It's not based on it. There's example after example after example of that, and so there's a lot of dogma out there that shouldn't be. They were talking about the big worry is that of hypercalcemia in the blood with taking too much vitamin D3. and yes, evidently you can have hypercalcemia if you take a huge amount over time. But they were shown, they had examples of people that are taking up 150,000 IUs a day for months, and they didn't have any hypercalcemia. There was a patient evidently in the early 1900s that they took vitamin D and they had hypercalcemia, and they just added two and two, and they thought they came up with 4, but they forgot to add all the other factors.
Yeah, well, maybe they didn't have no K2.
Yeah, you know. So, but anyway, the point is that now they're saying, boy, and then I gave an example. There were fairly recently there was one person who took almost over 900,000 IUs a day for weeks and weeks. Another person took almost 2 million IUs a day. I don't know how you accidentally do that, but they did for like I think it's 2 months. They did have hypercalcemia, but they recovered from it.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have to do anything fancy. They just kind of gave them some supportive care, sent them on home, and they recovered from it uneventfully.
Yeah.
So it became dogma that the fat soluble vitamins toxic. You take too much D3, it's toxic. Well, and I'm not saying go out and take 1 million IUs a day. Don't do that, because they did have hypercalcemia. I'm not saying anything except that's what they're saying. It's obvious, we know that we're low on vitamin D3. And I'm pretty sure we know that the current recommendations are ridiculous. That just doesn't make sense. We know that we're designed to produce up to or more, and they're probably going to say more than 25,000 IUs per day by our skin, which tells me that's all I need to know.
Yeah, well, think about all the times when you may be out in the sun in the pool or something for an hour.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to produce more than that. It doesn't all of a sudden make it
But
toxic.
the problem, the problem is that most of us aren't out in the sun much anymore. I
think that's
and so, but anyway, the point is that when you add it all, and then our foods don't have the nutrients in they used to. They were still getting some vitamin D from foods too. So you throw it all together, who knows what we were really designed to have, but it was probably a whole lot more than 25,000 IUs per day.
Yeah.
I think it's, I was real worried about taking 2,000 or 3,000 IUs per day, for long, even a couple of years ago. Oh my gosh.
I remember you and I started talking about this a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but it's obvious to me now that after reading this, as I said last time, always thinking that, well, the problem is it can be toxic because it can be stored in the fat, and so it's real easy to get toxic amounts. And suddenly, after reading this, it's obvious that they're fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, because we need a bunch of them, and we're going to be low.
And we need to be able to store them.
There are going to be days when you can't get out.
Yeah.
There are going to be seasons,
Yeah.
that you can't get out in the sun because it's 20 below zero or whatever, depending on where you live. And you need it, and you need to store a bunch of it, probably. And it's just the opposite of what I've spent my whole life thinking. You got to be careful. Those fat soluble vitamins stored in the fat. Well, no, they need to be stored in the fat because we're going to be low on them, and that's the reason they're fat soluble, so they can be stored because it's going to be easy to be low on them. It's a lot easier to get a hold of some water soluble vitamins and just keep pumping those in. So anyway. Not making any recommendations or anything like that, but I wouldn't be. I'm not worried about taking 10,000 IUs a day.
I know. I'm not personally either. I'm not. It don't worry me at all. I love getting out in the sun, and I supplement with K2 and D3 daily. I personally have felt a difference. I feel better.
It's important for our immune. Most people, their immune systems aren't humming along like they should. It's important for our immune function.
Yeah.
And
what is the medical term? I'm not sure. Interferon 1 or something in our immune system. I read just recently that vitamin D3 is required to turn that up in our immune system.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I read that.
Yeah. I just read that recently, and basically what it does is it helps. That's what our body uses to help get rid of bacteria and viruses.
Viruses, especially.
And the D3, helps to, turn that on, helps to support that in the body. So that's just another example of how beneficial it is.
Yeah.
Guys, we don't want to keep you too much longer, but like I said, start a conversation in the comments. I'm curious to see what you think about vitamin D3, K2. Do you take it? have you noticed any benefits? I know I have. I know Dr. Hall has. Just the conversations we had. And one thing I do want to point out before we call it. Dr. Hall said total body exposure to the sun. So if it's just me, tell me. But I think Dr. Hall's recommended we go to nude beaches. That's what it sounds like to me. I may be wrong. But hey guys, till next time, I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
And this is For the Health of It.